Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Settra, the imperishable of the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings are a really solid race. They have a good amount of strength, but they also have certain issues that Creative Assembly could easily fix to improve their campaign situation. But let's talk about the Tomb Kings. What are their strengths on the campaign map? Well, first off, every Tomb King unit is recruited for free. You have no upkeep, no unit recruitment costs whatsoever. While you don't have background income, that doesn't matter quite as much when all of your unit recruitment is done for free. Now, of course, the limitation here is with the exception of skeletal spearmen and warriors, every single unit does require structures in order to increase the unit capacity. So if you want things like tomb guards, you are going to need to get royal barracks. If you want artillery, you are going to need to get skull repository, and so on and so forth. By the way, over here I have a mod that splits the Land of the Dead into two individual provinces, like the Ash River and the Land of the Dead itself. Regardless though, the Tomb Kings have a good amount of power, even if they do play differently. No background income, but they can still trade, they can still vassalize other factions in the campaign. However, they can't confederate other factions in a campaign either. They can't confederate fellow Tomb Kings, which to some degree is understandable, but to another degree it is a bit ridiculous. But regardless, the Tomb Kings have a huge amount of power. On top of that, because their units are available for free, recruited for free, no upkeep, and their army leaders are also immortal from the moment you recruit them, Tomb King armies are the most disposable armies in the entire game. The only thing that isn't disposable in a Tomb King campaign are the actual heroes themselves. So, Tomb Princes, Necrotects, and Lich Priests. And that only lasts for about as long as it takes for you to be able to get Immortality at rank 20 with these heroes. So your army is disposable, while your heroes, they're far less so. One bit of advice with this, if you find yourself in a Tomb King campaign with an army in a bad position and you know you're going to lose the fight, and that can happen, just detach the heroes that you have as part of that army from the army so you can save them, because they're the most valuable thing in your campaign. I mean, hero capacity is permanently increased, of course, it's not tied to any particular structure, but at the same time, having higher ranked heroes in a Tomb King campaign is actually quite important. So there's a good amount of power, there's actually quite a good amount of economic potential as well in a Tomb King campaign, because again, they only need money for structures, which means that while certainly their structures can be expensive and they can cost an arm and a leg, the fact that they're not spending any kind of money whatsoever while still gaining money from battles like post-battle loot does put the Tomb Kings in a really great position with respect to their economic potential. And that is certainly something to be appreciated about the Tomb Kings in their campaigns in a lot of ways. Besides, other factions can give you still a significant amount of cash, so you are rarely, if ever, in a Tomb King campaign going to end up without money. You might have some issues, some stresses early on, but money is not really a major problem when you are playing a Tomb King campaign. Like over here, I mean, I have 1,000 to be able to get that gold mine, but I might be able to get some agreements, like if I go to Vorek and declare war on Araclas, that should be enough to get the gold mine and sort that particular problem out. And I do have over here Volkmar about to take Antok from me, which is certainly going to be unpleasant, but I can deal with that. Not a problem. So, huge amount of power available in a Tomb King campaign. But what are the issues? Well, there are plenty of issues in Tomb King campaigns. For starters, you start with only one army capacity from the beginning. You can't just recruit however many armies you want. You have unlimited skeletal spearmen and skeletal warriors, but you don't have the ability of recruiting more lords than just one until you increase army capacity. That is the first and biggest issue. Now, this was designed for Warhammer 2. In Warhammer 2, it kind of makes sense, because in Warhammer 2, for vast majority of factions, maintaining two armies was a significant issue, especially in the early game. But now in Warhammer 3, you have races that within the first 20 turns can maintain 3, maybe even 4 armies, dependent on who we're talking about. But in the vast majority of Tomb King campaigns, you're going to need 14 turns, so turn 15, in order to be able to even get a second army. The way you increase army capacity is through 2 things, or 3 things technically. So you can research the dynasty, though this will always reduce your research rate, so you research one dynasty, the other one is going to be slower. You can get the heralds empowered as well from the research. So there's research that does improve your army capacity. That is the principal way of increasing the army capacity. Now, as you might imagine, there is a limitation here. So you're looking at 6 armies, so 7 armies in total, 8 armies if you're talking about the Heralds Empowered, which costs canopic jars. And you're getting a bunch of banners that, really the main reason you're getting this is for the sake of the Heralds Empowered to increase their army capacity. Also, the global recruitment benefit and global recruitment capacity is great, keeping in mind all your units are recruited for free. The other way of increasing army capacity is to you go into the mortuary cult and just awaken a new dynasty. Now this costs a decent amount of gold, but the real problem here is it costs a significant amount of canopic jars. And the problem with canopic jars is there's only so many you can gain. Like you have a post-battle option on field battles that gives you 30. You have with settlements, if you just occupy them, an additional 30. So you're looking at 60 potentially in a turn if you fight a field battle outside, if you and then take over a settlement, 60. And then you can get quest battles. So canopic jars are a main limitation in a campaign, and increasing army capacity is significant. Now, of course, you can get things like canopic jar hoarders with a lot of hero capacities, and the problem, however, with this is you're spending points, like you can get this relatively early on, but you're wasting points on other things that could be more valuable on heroes. Sure, later on in campaign you'll have enough canopic jars to do whatever the hell you want, but keep in mind the cost of this, of a new dynasty, escalates. The problem for the Tomb Kings is that the cost early on is significant and it's very slow. So you're spending 15 turns to do something that every other faction in game can do from turn 1, with exception of the Beastmen. But it's not quite the same issue as the Beastmen. See, in a Beastmen campaign, yes, you may only have 1 army until you increase the capacity, but it's not necessarily going to take you 15 turns to increase your army capacity as the Beastmen either, because in a Beastmen campaign, the speed at which you increase that army capacity depends on the speed that you're doing rituals. So the faster you do the ritual, the more you can increase your army capacity. So Beastmen can actually do it much faster, whereas there's no way in a Tomb Kings campaign of speeding up the process. You can certainly get a lot of canopic jars, but there's other things you may want to do to those canopic jars, like for instance, getting certain hero capacities, getting the heralds, unlocking hero capacity, further hero capacity in mortuary cult. So not a great system at all over here with regards to army capacity. Ends up severely limiting your campaign, especially as Settra, because Settra starts a war in the default game, starts a war with Numa, starts a war with the vampire counts in the Springs of the Eternal Life. He's got Scarbrand to the north, he's got many factions around him gunning for his head, and he's only got 1 army over a vast area of territory to defend. And this is a problem in a campaign as Katep, this is an issue in a campaign as Khalida. This isn't an issue in a campaign as Archon, but that's because Archon starts with an extra army capacity. So his campaign situation is substantially better than what Settra, Katep, and Khalida have to deal with for much of that early game. So the early game of the Tomb Kings is quite a miserable experience. Because if you're playing on any kind of difficulty, like consider this situation, this is legendary very hard. You see Volkmar has 1 army here and another army here. Yes, I'm using the Millennium mod for Warhammer 3 here. But regardless, you have 2 armies, and this is the kind of situation you're going to end up in a campaign as the Tomb Kings. This makes it very front-heavy as a campaign, in the sense the early game is always going to be excruciating unless you're playing as Archon the Black, in which case you're just going to steamroll everyone. But as Settra, as Katep, as Khalida, it's always going to be excruciating, especially as Settra, who technically should be the strongest legendary lord, but he isn't. And then once you get 2, 3, 4 armies, you're just steamrolling on the campaign with no opposition. It's a really screwed up difficulty curve in the game where the early game is exceptionally miserable, but once you get going and you can't be stopped. That is my problem with the Tomb Kings. One of the problems with the Tomb Kings. What would be the solution? Well, plain and freaking simple. Allow us to get the second army within 4 turns, not waste 15 turns of the campaign to be able to unlock a dynasty. Also remove that extra army that Archon has. If there's anyone who needs a second army, it would be Settra, the imperishable. But the army limitation. Another thing I would change is how you gain canopic jars. You should have a scalable canopic jars post-battle option. It should not be a fixed value, because you are going to need a lot of canopic jars for all of these things that you have in the mortuary cult and the research tree. So that would be something I would change. On top of all of this, when we're talking about the Tomb Kings, another thing that's really annoying is the fact you can't confederate other Tomb King factions. It doesn't matter if we're talking about minor ones or major ones. This is an issue because if you consider the Tomb Kings in the lore, the vast majority of them followed Settra. Like, you consider the Legendary Lords. Yes, Settra and Archon were mortal enemies, but Khalida bent the knee, Katep bent the knee. The other Tomb Kings bent the knee, even if they had to be forced. The fact that you cannot confederate other Tomb King factions is just absolutely freaking ridiculous in a Tomb King campaign. Even more so when the campaign victory conditions require you to actually take all of this territory in Khemri in order to win the campaign. In a campaign as Settra or Archon, this kind of works. In a campaign as Khalida, you're gonna have to fight Settra, who Khalida served in the lore. And it's the most ridiculous with Katep, who has a miserable journey and a miserable campaign to make his way to Khemri to have to fight and annihilate Settra, who is his overlord. It's like Tyrion fighting a war with Teclis level of ridiculousness, or Boris fighting Catherine level of ridiculousness, or Karl Franz fighting Gelt. But that's kind of how Tomb King's campaign ended up playing. Finally, so confederations would be great to have in a Tomb King campaign. And then finally, there's the fucking Books of Nagash. These books are miserable. They're spread far too apart from each other. The benefits they give you aren't necessarily significant in all of them. Some can be really useful, like for instance the 4th Book of Nagash can be quite great. Canopic Jars, Lord Recruit rank, that's all really well and good. Or the 1st Book of Nagash, that's good. But really, there's one Book of Nagash that's significantly better than the others, and far more so, and that is of course the 5th Book of Nagash. This gives you a significant amount of unit capacity for Tomb Guard with halberds, and an extra army capacity. This is the level of power you get from that one fucking book is incredible. But here's the thing that's problem with the books. Well, multiple issues with the books. One, first off, you cannot gain the books through diplomacy. So for instance, let's say Khalida takes Lamia here. If I were to ally Khalida, I still wouldn't get the book. This doesn't apply to Forik. Like, he can gain his artifacts through diplomacy. The Chaos Dwarves and Realms of Chaos can get the artifacts for diplomacy. The Tomb Kings can't. That's one of the things that needs to be changed. And it would be a simple thing. We know it can be changed in a campaign. On top of this, because there are obviously going to be more issues, but on top of this, the position of these books is randomized. So, for instance, if you're playing a campaign, etc., the location of the books where they are, like one in the White Tower of Hoeth, one in Rogue Armies, all of that is always going to be the case. What is randomized, however, is where each book is. So, for instance, the 5th book could just as easily be in the location of the 1st book, or in the location of the 7th book in this campaign. This creates a really annoying campaign situation because the 5th book is so damn powerful that when you're starting a Tomb King campaign, you might want to start it 5 times until you get the book you want in the position that you absolutely wanted. My recommendation, play with a mod that allows you to quick save, to quick load on Legendary. Have a campaign save on the first turn with the book locations where you want them to, and if you ever feel like playing the Tomb Kings for all their issues, just do so. Start campaign until you get ideal book positions, because having to march all this fucking way to Ulthuan to fight a war with Tyrion, because who do you think is going to control Safari, is a really freaking annoying campaign dynamic to tackle. It is not good at all. And all of these things, all of these kind of issues, like the randomization of the books, the canopic jars, the army capacity, the Confederation issue, all of these things are minor problems. But all of these things combined end up ruining the campaign experience for the Tomb Kings. Because it means their early game is miserable, but once you overcome like 30 turns, you've won the campaign. There's no way you're going to lose a Tomb King campaign once you've got 3 freaking armies available, especially if you've survived the early game. Like, if you're playing a campaign, etc., and you've defeated Volkmar and Manfred, congrats, you've won the campaign. There is nothing that is going to stop you after that point. Not Scarbrand, not Malagor. Also, just an annoying side note over here. It is annoying. Keep in mind the mod that splits the land of the dead into provinces. But it is really, really, really annoying the fact that Numas is is within range of the Hearthstone that Malagor puts there. Because chances are Scarbrand's going to declare war on you if you're playing etc. And chances of him blowing Numas to hell and back are very freaking high. So it is annoying. Though there are mods to fix that. There's plenty of mods to fix these issues. These are minor issues that should be fixed by Creative Assembly. And these are things that really degrade the campaign experience for the Tomb Kings. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.